And it should be recording. Righty.
Yep.
Hello, everybody, and welcome here to this presentation where we are going to look at the end-to-end tests with a focus around automation and how they are run in our monorepo. So let me just share my screen. All right, so most of what we need around end-to-end tests is kept into this directory, the end-to-end test directory. And here we actually manage both the test cases for the monorepo, which are in the Cypress and Playwright directory, but also the scripts to run them, which are mostly placed in this .ci and in the make file. What is there to mention? I mean, we're gonna go a bit in depth about this whole directory later, but there is something that I should mention now, that the expectation around this is actually that if you go into this directory and you run make, then the smoke tests will run. This is true if you have pushed a commit to the to a PR, for example, or if you have explicitly specified a server image, because this actually depends on a Docker image being there for you to run the tests on. But as I said, we are gonna go into deeper detail into this later. First, I want to briefly show what an end-to-end test looks like in general. Just to agree on what we are going to talk about. And I'm going to show you. So I recorded it because it's a little bit heavyweight. I hope you can see this video. You should see a terminal.
Yep, seeing the terminal.
Great. Okay, so this is what it would look like if we wanted to run the end-to-end tests interactively. You can go into the end-to-end tests directory. Then you can run make start server. This assumes actually that you have, as I mentioned, a server image, a Docker server image available that you want to use. And I actually specified this before running this. I will show you in a bit, but you can notice the Docker image hash right there. That's actually the commit number. And this image, so it can be stored. I specified this into this .ci/env file. It's the same hash, and you can get there this information into the smoke test either by putting it into that env file or just by exporting it into your shell environment. All right, and now we got the server and its dependencies running, and now you can run this. You can open Cypress here to run a few tests. We will run them in Chrome, and what you will see here is a list of all the specs, the spec file. Each of them contains some test cases, and I chose one of them to run. What will happen here is that Cypress will use this embedded browser to run what's specified into this file. It will just push and type and check as it needs based on the test case goal. And so this is what an automated end-to-end test looks like. Yeah, just for clarity, I can also open the test case that we just ran. Take a look at it, at what it looks like. It's JavaScript, and there is some preparation. I mean, this is the Cypress way of specifying tests. We create a test case, we prepare it by initializing a user, for example, then registering a webhook, because in particular, this test case's goal is to verify that incoming webhook creates a direct message. And so we prepare the webhook, we visit page, and this is the actual test. So this was the preparation part, and the actual test, we will get the left-hand side of the interface. We will check the username is there, and we will click on it. We will verify that there is a message. We assume that the webhook has already been sent. We'll specify this happens here. And Then we will click on the username, and as you've seen from the recording, what will happen is that the user's DM is opened, and you should see a new message from the bot. So this is the general idea here. You may have noticed that I run make start server in that directory, but actually I also mentioned that if you run make and that's it, you will get a non-interactive way of running tests. So Cypress would be running within the make command itself. But the biggest takeaway from this is all we need to run end-to-end tests is a Mattermost instance and some corollary services, for example, the database. And then we can run Cypress also to run the test against this Mattermost instance. Well, the server side can actually run anywhere theoretically, as long as Cypress has access to it and to the corollary service, because it may need to. And for example, the recommended way to actually develop test cases is not this one that I've shown you, because this one is explicitly for end-to-end tests, but rather you would go to the server directory here and do a make run in here to get the code that you have right here built and run also with some corollary services to develop test cases against. But actually what we want, I mean, the goal with end-to-end tests is to test built artifacts. So that's why we rely on these Docker images. So with that said, we can look at smoke test, how it runs in CI. I took this PR, for example, thanks Saturn for the availability. And we can take a look at this directly. I will actually put it side to side with the workflow file that we have specified. Although, as you will see soon, the workflow for the end-to-end tests is actually a very thin wrapper around the template that we use. In which, so this is the only job which uses this workflow underneath, and it specifies the current commits hash and a status check context that, I mean, I was really a bit fast, but you can see that it's this one, end-to-end test, smoke test. This is the status check name for the job. And so actually what we need to look at is the underlying template. And this is actually rather a big template with a lot of variables. You may have also noticed from the end-to-end tests that there are, I mean, from the README, I mean, that there are tons of variables here, and that's why you will see that also the workflow is rather complex because of that. But essentially, we can put them side by side and take a look at them. And so the first step here is the resolve ref. You can see here, the only goal for this is to get the reference that you have given to the template and resolve it in case you want to give it anything that is not a commit hash. But actually for a smoke test, all we do here, we will always get a commit hash, but not for a full end-to-end test, because they may be run against any commit. They are not just run on push. You can do release testing or anything else with them. So we need a mechanism to make it easy to resolve these. So, and after the ref is resolved, what we will do is we will put a status check on the commit. You have seen here, this is what a status check on GitHub is, this little check mark here. And at first we put it as pending. You see here. And in fact, like if you open a PR for which you pushed the a commit for recently, you will see most of these as pending. Then after the resolve ref and update initial status, we will get some pre-flight checks, I would call them. And these are basically some linting around the tests. As you have seen, it's JavaScript code. So we also need to link them. And this generate build variable, which is more interesting for the whole execution flow. So these are the two checks. And then we have generate build variables. So running the tests themselves, as I've briefly shown you, accepts a lot of variables, and some of them we need to generate for either ease of use by the users, or any other reason, or just because we need to generate them dynamically for whatever reason. And so we will generate a few variables here. We will generate the workers number. I will talk more about this later. We will generate the branch name, which is actually not always a branch. It could be also a user-friendly string in the form of server PR. And then we put the PR name here if the commit is part of a PR. And this is used mostly, I mean, the reason why it's not always a branch name is that it's because for user ease of use. I will also show you later when we talk about the dashboard a bit. And also a build ID, which is also used by the dashboard. In the smoke test, we are not using the dashboard. I should mention that. So most of these are not used, but the workers we still need to generate. Yeah, and the generative cycle also interests the dashboard, on which I will expand later, but this is also not used by smoke test. And then we will get to the actual tests. This is where they are run. And this is done using the matrix functionality for GitHub Actions, because we actually are able to split a single end-to-end test run across many workers. So the reason why you may have noticed that there are 20 workers each time you run an end-to-end test is because each of them will run a shard of the full test cases list. And this is how we implemented it into GitHub Actions. So what's happening here is we set the variables that will be needed by the test. These may or may not be empty. In the smoke test case, for example, this will be empty. And what happens is we check out the repo. We theoretically could run also on macOS if there is a need to, but this is not the end goal of end-to-end tests for now. And this is the actual step that runs the test. It's just a make. As I said, make will run the smoke test. And so this is what it does. We can actually open the job a little bit and peek at it. This is very nice that you are able to see this step, where make is run, because it also prints out all the variables that are used. So you can reproduce this locally by simply setting these variables here. Yeah, and then, as you've seen in the video, everything kind of happens, and as in any smoke test. So the server is started, it's then prepared. We will go into this a bit later. And then eventually what happens is that we run, let me find it. There it is. The run test script, which starts running the test cases. And this is what it looks like. So this will run the this test case file, which is actually TypeScript. And then it will check all the cases here. And at the end, each worker will tell you how many test cases it passed. So this contains 0 failures. That's great. And we are actually, so this is where we are. This is the assert test result. And this is something that we do on our side. And only if you can see that there is this workflow input test case failure fatal, which is something that is usually true, but it may not be. For example, for the time being, for full end-to-end tests, if there are some failing test cases, we don't put a failing check mark on the run, because they will be, I mean, there may be flaky tests or similar, and they need review rather than saying that just because it failed, the whole run failed. Although eventually the goal is for this to be also, I mean, we want to enforce 100% to be able to merge a PR. And after the test is run, go back to summary here. The report should be published, but we don't here. This is also another input that the workflow takes. Enable reporting, which decides whether this is skipped or not. Here it is. You will see something weird here. This is an FYI concerning GitHub Actions. You should not, for the time being at least, use an if at job level, but rather you should use it at a step level if you plan to skip all of the steps. And that's because if you do put it at job level, it will spoil the dependency graph. So that means if you skip the publish report job, then any job that needs it will consider it as failed. And this is a problem for the whole flow. So we actually want to run the job, but we don't want to run any step. And you can in fact see that it lasted just 2 seconds because everything was skipped. And then at the end, we can set this check mark here back on the, so there is the update success final status. This is also another GitHub Actions limitations actually that is there right now. We have to resort to a trick in order to decide whether to put a success or failing check mark here. And you can see it's a success because there were 0 failures. And so this is for the smoke test. Now, before I show you the full end-to-end test run, I will like to show you a test run that is local but uses the automation dashboard. I talked about it briefly, but I should mention it because it's rather important for full end-to-end test runs. And as I said, it's a bit heavyweight, so I recorded another video for this. The automation dashboard can also be run locally. It's also an open source project by Saturn. And its goal is basically to show you both the progression of the run, but also to help you shard the jobs. You can see there are 2 containers here that get launched. And also, when you start the dashboard, a token is auto-generated for you. It's fine to show this. I mean, this is just a throwaway token. It will be different every time you start the dashboard. And something that we must do if we want to do this locally is we need to specify a build ID. I will go in detail about it a bit later when we look at the README. And then we need to generate a test cycle, which really means telling the dashboard, okay, there will be a run, an end-to-end test run here. In this case, I didn't specify any anything other than the defaults for the variables, which means that the test cycle which will actually run the smoke tests. And here you see a test cycle being generated, and on the dashboard, it knows that we want to run some tests, and we will run them very soon by referring again to the automation dashboards, and in particular to the build ID. Which you can see on the right. There is my test, which I specified over there for the Mattermost repo. And now we're on make, which means really running the smoke tests again locally. But the difference now is that I've shown you some briefly the automation dashboard token that were generated when you started the dashboard. And well, this will be detected by the script. So if you run make here, if no automation dashboard variables are specified, then they will run normally. But if it finds that they are specified, and they will be imported if you run start dashboard, in that case, the dashboard logic will be used. You will see very soon. Right now, it's preparing Cypress, which is its own container for running the tests. And very soon you will see that the scripts will check if the automation dashboard variables are. You see it right here at this line, automation dashboard URL is set. It uses a different underneath script to run this because the logic is completely different. run these tests. Okay, and the video stopped. But this is just what you can expect from a dashboard run. After that, it would simply start running the test cases again, and you will see on the right on the dashboard that the test is in progress. And you will get a real-time result. And that said, we can now take a better look at a full end-to-end test run, which is also reported in a manner that is very similar to the smoke tests. This is what its job looks like. But actually, if we open the workflow file here, you can see that there is one additional step, but then there is another job that it uses the same template as the smoke test. So both smoke test and full end-to-end test just use the same template, but with different variables specified. So we should take a look at the template again if we want, or we can just sorry, there is the Zoom header that is not helping me here, but we can just take a look at the variables here while we look at the test. It will be a bit more garbled, but you can, I mean, we can walk through it anyway. So at first, there will be this step here, which generates some test variables. And this is because, so you can see that the end-to-end tests will be a bit different. They don't accept commit hash like the smoke tests did. They accept any ref and also a report type. And I should also show you the way that this test was run. Basically, if you go to actions and end-to-end tests, if you're authorized to do so, you will get this. So you can basically, if I wanted to run an end-to-end test against master branch or any release, I could put master here. I could, well, in this case, this is not implemented yet, but I will be able to just run such a workflow, and then I will start a run against the master branch. And although this will not be the way, I mean, if you have contributed to Mattermost, you will see that you can run end-to-end tests using a / end-to-end - tests if you are authorized to do so, of course. And then a test will be triggered for that PR. We will also introduce a similar logic for GitHub Actions-based tests. Because this is a bit harder to use for PRs. I mean, you can put the branch name, but we want to make it easier. So this is how it was launched and how these two variables, the ref and report type, were filled. And so it was a PR, and I put the ref, the branch name as a ref, and we will. So as a first step, we need to generate some test variables for it, because there are some varying variables that should be set. For example, based on the report type, it will be either an end-to-end test, or it could be a release test, for example. We want this to change based on, I mean, on some logic. So in this case, we could switch on the report type, just like it's happening here. Then we can also choose the workers number, and this is what I mentioned before. We are able to run, because we use the automation dashboard, we are able to shard the test across 20 workers. That's why you can see how many workers are here. And right after that, I mean, we use these variables. You can see them here as output for this job, and they are fed into this other job input. And the same underlying template is used. So what will happen is we can also open it again. The ref is resolved, and this is useful now because we have specified the branch name. Then update initial status is done, and that's also. I need to open the PR again. That's fine. That's the status check that we saw before, the little green check mark. Then the pre-flight checks are actually skipped here. I can show you. Because we don't need to check again. We assume that the smoke tests have run already when we run the full end-to-end test. So we don't really need to check the linting of that same commit again. The reporting is enabled, and we also run a different set of Docker services here. We will go into more details about this a bit later. But this is because the full end-to-end test actually includes some test cases which depend on external services. For example, LDAP login. If we want to test it, we need, of course, to have an open LDAP service there. And so we will need to have it running along everything else when the test is run. And yeah, the test filter is different because it's not smoke test anymore. This is the full end-to-end test run as reported in the README and report type in the end. So taking a look here, the pre-flight checks are skipped. We generate build variables here, which will be different than smoke tests, of course. And then the generate test cycle will now actually generate the test cycle. We can take a look at it because the automation dashboard is used here. And this will reply with a JSON. We can look at the make generate test cycle that they have also shown you in the local run is also run exactly as it is here. And this will be an ID of a run. And we can check that runs cycle in here. This is what it looks like with a run that's fully done. And after this, the actual tests start and they sharded across these. We can take a look at this one and at the actual test step. And the most interesting one is, of course, the actual running. Here, make is used again, but it's not just smoke test that run because we have specified a few variables here. The automation dashboard is set. We have a license. We have Docker services. As filter, no specific additional server variables are set. You can see that the branch has been given a name containing the server PR, which you can find here for extra clarity. The build ID is something that has been uniquely generated out of the commit ID, the job run, the job attempt, and the kind of test that we do. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Then what happens in this text is that it will run, again, test cases, but the way that it works, it's a bit different. Instead of going through the test cases by itself, listing them itself, what it will do, it will ask the automation dashboard for a test case, which it knows about at the cycle generation step. And it will fetch it and start working on it. And in fact, this specific test case, to be perfectly clear, will be run only by the worker with IDs index 0. So it will pick one of the jobs and work on it by itself. And eventually, it will complete all the steps. And actually, we will skip the test assert result, as I said before, because we don't want this to fail if there is some test cases failure. We want the QA testers to be able to review what happened here. Is it a valid error or is it a fluke? Like it could be related to master branch instead of your PR, for example. So this needs to be reviewed by some QA tester. Yep. Is there anything else that I should mention here? Yes, one thing that is important to note. Each worker has got its own server instance and Cypress instance. So it's running in isolation its own server, which doesn't interact with other workers' servers, and its own Cypress that it runs against its own servers. This whole automation dashboard additional logic is just a way to distribute work across these units. It would be rather interesting to compare this to the smoke test variables. But I think it was PR. Well, that's okay. I mean, these were mostly unpopulated, so no need to look at those. So now that we have seen both smoke tests and full end-to-end tests, that they use the same underlying mechanism, but with different control variables, we can take a look at what is the part of the whole setup that actually will use these variables. So we should take a deeper look in here. So this is the directory where the make command is ran. And it's rather extensively documented. You can see here what to do with it. So here are the documentation of the variables that you can use to configure it. There is the server kind, which could be self-hosted or cloud. The CWS URL, which is only useful if you're using a cloud instance. Then the test kind, it could be Cypress Playwright or none. This is in case you only want to launch a server instance. And basically make becomes an alias for make start server. And then here we specify which side servers will be launched alongside the main Mattermost container. So you can see Postgres is here in buckets for email testing, and these are optional for smoke test, but actually for full test, they are required, as I mentioned. Then there are additional variables like license and some variables which will be exploded into more environment variables. This is to basically inject. This used to be what is used by the / comment that you put in the PR comments to trigger an end-to-end test if you want to launch a server with a certain variable set. And so this is now not implemented yet, but we will do it also for the new way of triggering these GitHub Actions-based end-to-end tests. And then there are some variables to configure the interaction with the dashboards. The most important are these two, but you also need to specify the browser for Cypress. And these three are basically what uniquely it identifies the run within the dashboard. You can specify actually any server image here. The default is to take the current commit and use its hash as a tag for the image, but you could just put any release or any build here. The test filter you can fully control, and these are the tunables here. This is how you start the dashboard, as I showed you in the video. And I also mentioned that you should specify a build ID which does not change across the cycle generation and the test run, because that's uniquely identifying the run. Then, make can be used to start the Cypress smoke test, or if you specify that the variable, it can be used in other ways. Yeah, but this is basically the README. We can go into a bit more detail here by looking at the make file and also at the CI directory, which is the most interesting part, I believe. At how does this all happen? So the make file, let's first take a look what happens when you just run make. So the first command is taken, which is traditionally all, and I use it as an alias for run. So make run would be equivalent. And in make run, these steps will basically run. The cloud init and cloud teardown are only used for cloud tests. And these are the most interesting ones for self-hosted. So we got the generate server step, and we can take a look. So it will map to actually this script, .ci/server generate. And you will notice also a pattern in the scripts. This is the first one that we see, but this block is basically everywhere. And the interesting part is that we always source this .end-to-end RC here. So every script that we use will actually, just to show you, this is everywhere. So every script that we use will actually source the script, and we need to do this because they set a few variables for the run. So there's also some function specification which can be used across all the scripts. And also this is responsible for defaulting all the variables. So I mentioned that if you don't specify any server image, then the current checked out head commit is used to produce the tag here. Also, the default browser is Chrome, default tests are self-hosted. This is why you can see, for example, why running just make will trigger the smoke test, because we do this. And also, these are the default dependencies. So this is interesting to understand where these are default. And also, you can see that the build ID is here defaulted, but dynamically generated. So if you don't specify a build ID yourself when trying to use the dashboard, this will fail because at cycle generation time and at test run time, they will be different. And the test that is running will not be able, will query the dashboard for a cycle, but it won't be able to find it. It will return 404 because it won't find it. But going back to generate, what we do here for the running Docker actually is that we generate a Docker compose file. Actually, we'll go to the bottom first. These are all function specification until here. Then we do some checks, and then we do some preparation for variables. But the most interesting part is here. So we will do some more assertion around the services that are run because we don't want to run invalid configurations of services. We will then generate the Docker compose file and the env files. I try to make it look as much as possible this as a YAML file using here docs. So this should be rather, easier to read, as easy as possible for a bash script. And so you can see if Postgres is there, for example, in the enable Docker services, which I've shown you before in the defaults file, then we add this block right here. So this is the basic logic around kind of everything. There is a bit more like ARM64 variations and such. But yeah, this is the gist of it. And then also some env files are generated, which are used basically for by the containers. And this is to have good separation between what is your shell environment and what gets into the containers. So this is fully controlled by these. We don't really pass other environment variables other than what's policed here. And for example, I could show you the Cypress variable, which are the variables that are given to the Cypress container. You can take a look at here at how it's managed. We will pass these variables if given. So these will be put into the file. These are specified in the README. And also additional stuff will be put in there, but anything that is not specified in here will not end up in the Cypress container, which is Dockerized and so isolated from your shell. All right, and this is for the generate part. Just as an extra exercise, we can also run it here. I can show you what I have here. I just specified this image, but I could also remove it if I wanted. We can do it, generate server. And you can see, like, for example, right now, I would expect this one to be my image, which should not exist. And we can take a look at the generated file right here, server.yml. Oh yeah, the server image is right here. It's given as a variable to this file, but basically you can explore what is generated by this. And you can also take a look. You can also do this. You can see the various env files. So in the Cypress container, we will have these variables given. So the branch, build ID and CI-based URL, which is used by the dashboard, the browser, the fact that it's headless, repository, and yeah, etc. So some variables will end up here if you specify them, of course. And then the .env.server is actually empty right now because we didn't specify in this variable right here that is exploded to whatever is passed to it. But basically, this is the base logic of how everything works here. We generate the Docker Compose file, and then everything else happens. We start the server, we prepare the server, and then we run the tests. So we can briefly take a look at those. So this is a very thin layer around starting Docker Compose. We actually specify that the Docker Compose command in here because we can use, or rather, we specify it in here, just be very explicit. Docker Compose, we give it project name, and then we use the generated server file here. And this is done to distinguish it from the dashboard Docker Compose, which is separate, as you can run the dashboard also locally, but it must be managed in another Docker Compose file because one already existed for it. So starting it is just a matter of first we remove the orphans, we take them down, then we wait for the server image to be there because it may be building in your PR before. I mean, you may have pushed your commit to a PR, but then the image is not ready because it's still being built, and so this will wait for it. And then we create the containers, we bring them up, we wait for them to be healthy because we added health checks on every of those containers. So Docker Compose will play very nicely with it. I think we can also take a look at this. So these are not all here because there are some pieces of this configuration which are taken from the server directory elsewhere. But you can see that we, for example, added health check here in the generated Docker Compose file. And so after the server has been started, then we prepare it, which really means getting some plugins in, for example. We can do some initialization of some services. We also upload the license here. We don't give it as an mvar because it may be removed by end-to-end tests, and that cannot be done if you specify the license as an mvar. So we do it programmatically at server preparation time. Yeah, and there may be some service-specific initializations, like for OpenLDAP, we need to do some configuration or of either the Mattermost server or of the service itself. And in the end, we run the tests, which again is really thin layer because the Cypress container has been set up at generation time. And so what we do is just you will see this pattern. We can run command in the Cypress container of the server Docker Compose file. And this is how everything happens here. And eventually, there is some preparation also, but eventually what we do is we will do a case switcher on the automation dashboard URL variable. So if the dashboard is used, then we use the run test cycle script. Otherwise, we use the run test script. They are quite different. I mean, and this is the message that we see before in the full end-to-end test run. So these script I can also quickly show. Because they are the core of it. This is what actually runs the tests themselves. There is this run spec that basically will get the test cases from the dashboard as long as it has them and run them. And eventually it will tell you how many tests it run from, I mean, how many specs it run from it. And this is only in the case the dashboard is used, of course. Otherwise, the logic would need to be different. There is no dashboard to ask for tests about. So we will run this. And this is, it will just run tests. It will do the list of test cases itself and then just go through them. Yep. So this is actually the current situation and some of the internals that are there. Anything else that I should mention? Perhaps some future work. So since I've shown you most of the stuff, I can also tell you that we will perform some additional work on these. For example, the trigger by comment is one of them, which is right now not supported by the GitHub Actions ones. Then we will stabilize the test results. We want a stable 100% because eventually we plan to make it mandatory for these end-to-end, the full end-to-end test run to be there for PR mergeability. Then we will implement more test types. For example, there is the high availability test, server test, and also the cloud tests right now are not implemented. That will be done. We will have more documentation, and we eventually will completely deprecate the old mechanism to run end-to-end tests. And that's it for the presentation.